What's up, everybody? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. And man, oh man, oh man, we've been waiting for this day for 855 days, shall we say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, wait. 1,885 days, right?
1,855 days. That's right.
Yeah.
I think to be fair, I gave him like a 2-year grace period, but yeah. But Kendrick Lamar has finally released his new album or albums, shall we say, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. How you doing, man? It's been a couple of days. How you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. It's fun to have albums that you really need to digest. Hip hop is great because some of the classics out there, I think you can take at face value and they're still incredible. They're still classic, but there's albums out there. I'll say Biggie's Ready to Die, J. Cole's KOD, Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links, that you, with every listen, they kind of unfold to you. And I think that's become the standard with Kendrick Lamar, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. What hip hop artists would you say are truly putting out albums? So not just a collection of songs, right? Because a lot of people will put out a bunch of singles. It plays well sonically, but it's not thematic, from beginning to end. I think about Jay with 444 being really conceptual. I can't, maybe Donda, given that it's related to his mom, but I think the themes were kind of loose there. Who do you see making albums like true, full, comprehensive bodies of work that are interconnected like Kendrick these days?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I agree with the two examples you gave. Jay, I don't know that Kanye's doing it as well as he's done it in the past, but we hold him to that standard. I would say J. Cole absolutely deserves to be on that list. And J. Cole, still will hit you with the singles throughout. He's a great example. I also think we got to give it up to another OG and Nas. I don't know that Nas executes, concept as elaborately as some of the others that we're talking about. But, you look at the First King's Disease, you look at, Hip Hop is Dead, you look throughout his career, he's definitely been a conceptual artist. And I think similar to Nas, maybe like one rung down from the others we're talking about, I think M is that. But perhaps like Kanye, I don't think M is doing it necessarily on the level of, other points in his career.
Yeah, for sure. No, KOD was masterful. Like I think that's as good as an album as we've had in the last 10 years. And I've talked a lot about it not getting the props that it should have gotten from Grammys and others, but I think it's fair to say that no one has done it on the level that Kendrick has for as consistently as he has over his career. Section 80 being an incredible concept, just to play on words there with, Section 8 and then him being an 80s baby and all the threads that fit those themes throughout the album. Good Kid, Mad City being his coming of age. Really his boys in the hood are looking to how he became who he became. To Pimp a Butterfly, examining his struggle with fame and having left Compton and the survivor's guilt, if you will, that he had with that. Damn, and just how complex that album was. We'll get into that in a little bit. And now Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Like I just don't know of anyone who has had a body of work that has been as consistently conceptual. Let's put aside even quality, but consistently conceptual as Kendrick has.
No, absolutely. He's never missed. And he plays at the highest level. He lets the anticipation build. I have never seen an artist really take 5 years from releasing one solo song. Sure, between 2017 and today, Kendrick's done features, he's done collaborations, Grammy, with Keem on Family Ties in 2021, which we'll talk about. But I've never seen somebody at the top of their game, take 5 years off. There's sure, OGs like LL and Kane and Rakim, they've been careful with the rock at this juncture in their career. But nobody takes 5 years. And what's crazy is even more than 2011, when Kendrick really burst onto a lot of radars, we are in a culture that is all about quantity. Quality, yes, but it's quantity. For you to feed the algorithms, you've got to stay consistent, you got to stay current, you got to put out things like 3-packs and 2-packs. And J. Cole and Drake have done those things, but Kendrick sat back. And when you think of incredible legacies on album levels, I'm thinking of Outkast, I'm thinking of De La Soul, Tribe. Kendrick has just set a ridiculous standard to me.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers more than measures up, as people are still digesting that album as they listen and watch this.
Yeah, it's interesting the point you make about the breaks. Obviously Dre did it between the Chronic and 2001. I think it's not 5 years, but Jay took a significant break between Black Album and Kingdom Come. A lot of people didn't feel that album in the same way, but American Gangster was kind of his true return, I would say.
Yeah.
I look to D'Angelo, with Brown Sugar and then Voodoo and then, Black Messiah. Like, I think you got to look outside other genres to see people who've taken that much time off and come back with that high quality of work.
Yeah, that's a really good example in D'Angelo. And with Dre, it's funny. I think that if the Aftermath compilation would have been received warmly, we would call that an album. Eminem took 5 years between Encore and Relapse. But in there was the Re-Up compilation, which had a bunch of new music and production. A lot of artists get to kind of cross their fingers and say, I didn't mean what I said. Like, feed the beast, but still keep their catalog intact. Again, Drake and J. Cole are great examples of that. But Kendrick is somehow different, and it's really interesting. And I wonder where he gets that from. Big reveal on this album is no Dr. Dre involvement. Again, even though Aftermath is one of the companies you'll see attached to its release, but I often wonder if he looks at Dre and just that idea of being in the laboratory, like truly a lab, or in maybe Kendrick's case, being on a hill and meditating in silence, what that really buys you. But I don't know about you, but I'm jealous. Like, as from one artist to another, I look at the space that Kendrick has taken from his art, and I think that every bit of it has impacted the quality that we're now getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Kendrick is an entrepreneur in that he's his own boss. I don't think that anyone dictates how and when he moves, and I think that's a big part of why he's been able to do the things he's done.
It's a really good point. So let me ask you, here we are, May of 2022, get the album, get the albums. When do you think, and one point of note, Kendrick is not a social media dude. He has been, I can't tell you the last time he did an interview. It may have been before the pandemic, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
When do you see the true, like, plant the flag, perhaps pun intended, to lead into this album?
Yeah, well, I'll say I think the last interview he did was for the Spotify podcast. What is it, the big show or something like that, where they go back and look at To Pimp a Butterfly. Those seem like, to me, pretty recent interviews. Like, I think they were done in fall of 2021. Mm-hmm. But I would say that the rollout for this album started in August of 2021. And, given the timing of that and the Spotify drop, I think this album was probably supposed to come in the fall, and something came up that delayed it. And I'm not sure what that was, but maybe there's some clues in the album. But so August of 2021, we get this very cryptic website that launches, Oklama.com, and it's got a folder in it called New Thoughts. And there's a statement from Kendrick saying that his new album will be his last on TDE, which is major news. You and I did a podcast, really celebrating everything that TDE has done over the last 10 years. And also a lot of really kind of poetic, almost cryptic type language about hills and beach cruisers and being away from his phone for months at a time. And it just sounded like kind of quirky, like, artistic, like Kendrick stuff. And we'll get into this, when the album drops, we realized there were a lot of clues, a lot of like Easter eggs there that were setting up the framework for what we were supposed to expect from this album. And then a week later, and because you and I talked about the timing and why the timing was then, we get the song from Baby Keem, and I'll never forget. I was on a trip at the time, and you were like, "Yo, Kendrick just put out a verse," and Family Ties with Keem was incredible, and it shook up the hip hop world almost like Control did back in the day from Big Sean, where Kendrick came out, put everyone on notice that he was back. He promised that new flows were coming. Be patient, brother. And that to me was like, okay, cool, here we come. And it also signaled that he was waving the PG Lang flag, literally. And so it was a new era, a new day for Kendrick in terms of labels and bosses. But would you agree with that? When would you say it came out?
100%. And it was funny because up until that point, I mean, you and I started this podcast in March of 2020. And I'm sure within our first 3 episodes, as we kind of reanalyze the music space in a changing world with the pandemic, we questioned whether we would see Kendrick that year, and we didn't get any answers. And then in 2021, August, the same month he put Control out in 2013, I believe, we get that clue. And what's so interesting to me too is if you go back to Family Ties, which is a record that you and I have both said we've liked more and more and more. I liked it when it came out, but I've come to appreciate it. I've really come around to appreciate Baby Keem's part in the song. A lot of those themes that were in Kendrick's verse, are tributaries into what he's talking about in this album and really what this album is about.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that too. So another thing that happened, and I believe this was fall of 2021, was that there were Kendrick leaks. And you remember there was a leak of a song of him like talking to a therapist and some other things. Did you listen to those at the time?
I'm funny about leaks. Honestly, like for years, they were the thing, man. You sought them out. And I do, I'll go back to the 90s and I'll look at songs that didn't make albums. But when leaks are happening in real time, I'm very careful. And I don't know why. Probably as a journalist, I shouldn't do this. But no, I don't remember, and I damn sure didn't listen. Did you get to hear the songs?
I feel a way about leaks too, especially with an artist like Kendrick, because I feel like it's not what their intended work is supposed to be. And, you and I have heard plenty of leaks over the years from Dre. I think, Kanye has had leaks, and inevitably it's unmixed, it's unmastered, it's not the true vision. And it's a lot of times just a prototype. So it's not the true vision of the artist. So for someone as intentional and careful as Kendrick, I really try and not listen to it, even though I really want to, because I don't think it's going to be a representation of what he's trying to convey. And I'm looking it up now. It says 3 unreleased Kendrick Lamar songs have leaked. And this story was, let's see. This article doesn't have a date. Okay. I won't call out our peers on this one. Leaked songs. So October 21st. It was October 21st with 6 Kendrick Lamar songs leaked. And so, that says to me that maybe the album was supposed to come out in the fall. We get the Keem set up in August. We get the statement that it's coming in August. Kendrick is promising that it's coming soon. And we started hearing rumors about that too. The leak happens in October, but then we don't get this music until May. There was another, I think, part of the rollout at the Super Bowl. So, again, I'm really always focused on the details and why Kendrick does the things that he does, because everything is intentional, everything's strategic. And so you might recall all the dudes had blonde hair and blonde beards, who were as part of his dance troupe, for lack of a better term. If you go back and look at that, the dances that they were doing were actually more akin to stepping, like of a college fraternity. And they were like literal stepping moves. And so that was our first introduction to the big steppers. And he talks about this on N95 and other songs, but that was a setup for part of the album too.
That's really interesting. And that's not something that you and I had discussed. I'm trying to remember too, because I haven't watched that performance in a month or so. Were any of dancers or entourage, were there canes involved at all or any of that stuff or no?
No canes,
All right.
but definitely stepping type choreography. It wasn't just like, random dance. I'm in a frat, and so I recognize that. But yeah, and then listening to him talking about stepping and steppers on the album too, like it all makes sense now.
That's a really good point. So, one more question is with that launch of that website, much has been said, much has been debated about, Oklama, and I remember it might have been you, it might have been somebody else, but everyone's trying to break down their meanings. I heard people talk Oklahoma. I heard the thing that I thought, up until recently was okay Lamar, like, okay, like, okay, Kendrick, but you have another theory behind it. Do you want to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
and with Kendrick too, like it's always possible that it's got multiple meanings. I thought it could be okay Lamar, like similar to like old Lamar, what he said on Duckworth. But Dissect, a phenomenal podcast that is done a fantastic job of creating entire series devoted to albums where they will dedicate each episode to a song on the album. They started with To Pimp a Butterfly. They've done Damn. They've done Frank Ocean's, I think Agent Orange. They've done a Kanye one. They've done a bunch of really cool albums. They released a snippet earlier in the week where someone realized that Oklama was likely from the language of the Choctaw indigenous people, and it means my people. And the phrase is often used when a prophet or a poet is addressing God's people on God's behalf. Now, we know from all the religious iconography in Kendrick's work over the years that he believes that he is a messenger from God, that religion is all over his albums from like the Kendrick Lamar EP all the way through now. And so I personally believe that nails it. That's likely the meaning of Oklama. And, we'll start to get into like things that support that as well. But what do you think? Is that what you believe now too?
I like that a lot too, the my people aspect. And also that just sounds in step, pun intended, with, how Kendrick communicates, like I'm thinking the Eddie Kendricks, my people hold on. Like these are, these are messages and that relates to your point, spiritual messages, racial, cultural messages. I can't think of an album that uses the term culture more than this one. So yeah, I really, really like that. And then you're right, it could be multiple meanings down to the name and the sound. And he may have come across this name and seen, a double entendre there. But I really, really, really like that.
Word.
So let me ask you a question. And you've alluded to it. We did, as you mentioned, a whole episode on, just Kendrick's history with TDE, that label's whole history. But I think it's important, and we're going to have a lot of folks that might be tuned into us for the first time. Talk to me a little bit about what Kendrick Lamar means to you and to your life, to your career, musically and personally, because I know there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, man. It's a lot. I went in, so I worked at BET from 2009 to 2014. And just before that, I had started AFH. And so I had my ear to the ground in a different way than most people did there. And, in doing AFH, Kendrick came onto my radar, I'd say sometime between Overly Dedicated and Section 80. So probably around end of 2010 or so is when I really started to lock into him. I was actually resistant at first just because his name sounded like an R&B name to me, two first names. And I was like, but as I started listening to the music, I was like, wow, this guy is unreal. I think it really jumped out to me with J Rock's Hook on Love It. And then also Terrace Martin had a song featuring Sci-Hi, the Prince, and Kendrick called Thirsty. And it had this Stevie Wonder Rocket Man sample, and Kendrick just snapped on that song. And from then on, I was like, yo, this dude and J. Cole are truly what brought me back to hip hop. Because in that time, the radio was being run by Ross and Jeezy and Wayne and Kanye. And, I like all those dudes, but substantively, in terms of what they were talking about, didn't do as much for me. But Cole and Kendrick were like speaking from the soul and really, really talking about some stuff. So I get to BET, and actually, I went to A3C, and it was 2011. Did a bunch of interviews with a bunch of artists where I asked them the same 5 questions. The series was called Where It All Began, to really get a sense of like what their journey was from beginning and their love of hip hop as fans to the point where they started it as their career. And I ended up getting Kendrick a couple weeks after A3C. Was riding in the car, had Dave Free with me in the car, and we went. Kendrick was gracious enough to give me an interview at like 1 o'clock in the morning after he'd done a show. And it was fantastic. I had met them in August of 2011. We were taping the Cypher for BT. They came to my office. I sat with them. I joke with Kendrick that he works hard. Some might say he's a little overly dedicated, total dad joke, but I got the laugh, And I said to them that I thought they were the best thing to come out of the West Coast ever without the name Dre attached to it. And it was then that they let me know, that they were actually cooking up some stuff with Dr. Dre. So I was like, okay, cool. Dre, he's the guy. He always recognizes talent. But from that point on, it became kind of a symbiotic relationship in terms of AFH and my coverage there, and then also my real advocacy for them in the building. In addition to the ciphers
in the BET building.
In the BET building, yeah. In addition to the ciphers and things like that, we had just launched this vehicle called the Back Room on 106 and Park, which is like the booth in the basement for Rap City. It was just a place where people could come and spit and freestyle. And I was the person who put every single MC who ever stepped into the back room in there. It was also as like my personal playground. And the first 2 people to bless the mic in the back room were Kendrick and Schoolboy Q. Schoolboy Q actually recorded the first freestyle, but we aired Kendrick's first because I think his project was coming out, and so it made more sense then. But from that point on, I would say there was a 2-year period where I saw Kendrick and TDE, because we put on a tour with TDE through our Music Matters
incredible tour
brand, and 106 in Park and all. So I would say that I saw him probably 2 times a month for 2 years, and there are a lot of really personal, times that I interacted with them that I won't get into on this podcast. They're very private, and I respect their privacy. But I will say that I was there for extremely meaningful moments in their arc. I played a very prominent role in at least the televised version of Kendrick Lamar and getting it out to that. He's acknowledged that to me, and but that is in no way to say that I can claim any responsibility for his success, because Kendrick is such a supremely talented person. He would have been, I think, who he is no matter what, but it is an honor that I was able to play a part in helping to make his path a little easier, and doing that for all the TDE guys for that matter. So a long way of answering your question is that we had a very, very close professional relationship. I've developed great personal relationships with those guys over the years. There was a time at South by Southwest in 2012 where they came to my room, my hotel room, all the TDE guys. So Absol, J-Rock, Q, and Kendrick. I interviewed all 4 of them. Those relics are somewhere on YouTube for us too. Kendrick and I were on a panel that I put together the next day with Kevin Lyles. TJ Holmes moderated it. We had the head of music for Twitter and myself. And, I've got a picture. I was one of the people who suggested that Kendrick should perform with Erykah Badu in the BET Awards when she sang on Don't Kill My Vibe. Both Jesse Collins, who produced it, and myself had that kind of idea independently, and we convinced Stephen Hill that should be he should do that. I've got the screenshot of the tweet just to keep the receipts on that one. There are a lot of moments, and but more importantly for me than anything I did with him professionally is that I am just a fan. I'm a stan. I am like obsessed. I think Kendrick is the GOAT. I've been saying Kendrick Lamar is the GOAT of hip hop since 2012 or 2013. I am not a bandwagon on this. And this is a guy who's loved Jay-Z for decades, who's loved Tupac for decades, who's loved Cube. But in my mind, Kendrick Lamar is the GOAT. And to this day, no matter how many times I've interacted with him, you know, in all the most casual of ways, I still get nervous around his presence because I just think he's that great.
That's first of all, that's dope. But also, you know, it's funny you say it's a dad joke with the overly dedicated line. You and I, you know, first crossed paths 9 years ago last month. So we're going on a decade. And not long after we met, we started working together. You had already built AFH. But one of the things that I admire most about you is I've never seen you speak to somebody with under the guise of journalism or with the intent of something for publication that you have not heard. I'm sure it's happened, but you truly do deep dives into people's catalogs, into their work. You learn the lexicon of why they are what they are. And what you don't know, you ask. And that's created some phenomenal interviews, many of which are on YouTube. But, you know, after our paths had intersected, you know, that had a very profound effect on AFH. I mean, obviously, we've covered him throughout the years. And I know you have a Michael Jordan-like intensity on all things Kendrick. Even as editor-in-chief of the site, whenever it's something Kendrick related, I kind of get out of my seat, you know, and hand you the phone. Like, I know that you have a vision and it hits you differently. And I firmly believe that Kendrick Lamar is the greatest rapper right now. And I've felt that way for a number of years. But in 2017, you know, Damn arrives. And I shared with you this week, you know, oftentimes just in the way the universe works, for as much, and I've had not many interactions with Kendrick, but when I was leading Hip Hop DX for 6 years, or 5 or 6, something like that, you know, right as I was leaving, one of my last orders, one of my last statements was to make sure that using that platform, we acknowledge Kendrick as part of the most elite class of MCs. And Kendrick and Punch and Top, that whole crew, we're grateful of that. But whenever Kendrick has made an album, I'm not always in a place to take it right away, like to really, you know, put the pins in the map and connect it. You have been, and you've gone to tremendous sacrifice to do so. But in 2017, he puts out Damn, which I think up until that point, was the loftiest concept we've seen from a Kendrick album and maybe from a hip hop album, period. And more than 2 weeks after the album was out, you had this tremendous epiphany, which I truly believe, and I'm going to use some figurative language, was a shot in the arm of what AFH was in a changing media space. I don't mean to make this a love fest, but can you just talk about that for a minute? Because that, you know, those were dire times just for anyone in music media. And you proved that more than 2 weeks after an album came out, that this music was still, you know, you could still digest it in a very special way.
Yeah, you know, I've approached every Kendrick album since Good Kid, Mad City the same way. You know, when that album first came out, I sat on my couch in my family room, which at my old house, which you've been in, and I turned off all the lights. I put on my headphones, same headphones I used to listen to this album. And I listened to it undistracted, undisturbed in its entirety, you know, and I hit up Dave and, you know, I had felt like swimming pool, like, so Compton was cool to me, but I didn't love it. You know, but then Swimming Pools came out and I thought it was unreal. But as I sat and listened to the whole album, I got those chills that you get when you know that you're witnessing something special, like a masterpiece. And fact, that was my last CD that I ever bought, physical CD, because I knew I was seeing Kendrick a couple days later, and I wanted to have him sign it. And I've got like it framed and like a cool display and everything. So fast forward to 2017, I do the same thing for Damn, and I'm listening to it, and I just listened to it sonically first, musically and everything. And DNA, Mike Will made it, is not my favorite producer in hip hop. I don't love that trap sound that much. DNA comes on, and I'm just trying to catch the wave of it. And then by the end, I get to Fear, Alchemist. I'm a sucker for Alchemist, and it's really starting to open up for me. And then when Duckworth comes on, just the beats and the beat changes are unreal to me. And so I text Ninth, and I'm like, yo, this is crazy. And he's like, brother, did you listen to what he said on that song? And I was like, wait a minute, huh? And I go back, and then I listen to the words, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy just told an incredible story about his life and fate and curses and generations and all that other stuff in a way that was so artful and magnificent. But I spent, so my takeaway from Damn at first was, okay, cool album. I need to listen to it more, start to unpack it. My son, and the thing about dads and dad jokes is that, like, so Kendrick has now united my sons and me musically, and they are from 12 to 21. And so there's a pretty healthy gap there, but we all gravitate around Kendrick, which I think speaks to him. My oldest son hit me up and was like, his favorite song was Feel. So then I go back and listen to that, and I become obsessed with it. And then gradually over the next week or so, I start to dial into, why is he doing the things that he's doing? Why is he using this voice at this time? Why is this guest there? What's up with all these reverse sound effects? There's something here. There's something here. And then I remember about 2 weeks after it dropped, Amanda Mester, Bonita, the third three-legged stool, the third one from our team, was like, have you listened to it in reverse order yet? Because at the time there were all these rumors, you're supposed to listen to it in reverse order instead of like the order that it came in. People were speculating that Kendrick was going to release a second album called Nation, and that it was going to happen after Coachella, and that didn't come true. But I went to a wedding, and on the plane, I started thinking, wait a minute, what if you're supposed to play it both forwards and backwards? It's not either or, it's and. And so then I started listening to it very intentionally and dissecting every single part. And I did this before the Dissect podcast by about a year or so. Yeah. And I started realizing that Damn was meant to be played both forward and backward. From the very beginning, the first thing you hear is it wickedness? Is it weakness? Are we going to live or die? You decide. And I realized that these are instructions for us as fans, that we can listen to it either way. And depending on the order in which you listen to it, it kind of decides your fate. One direction, the direction from Blood to Duckworth, is about free will and how we are able to break free of our DNA and our generational curses and act in a certain way through weakness, through submission, through humility to God, in a way where we can have free will. But if you play it in reverse, like Kid Capri says at the beginning of Duckworth, let's put it in reverse, then you end with DNA. And, even though he's got loyalty and royalty in his DNA, he's locked into it. And ultimately Blood, where he is killed at the end. And so, I put that basic theory into the document, and I always will give you shit about this. You and the man were like, yeah, no, actually, y'all didn't even respond. Y'all didn't respond for at all. And so then, you said, I'll get to this a little bit later. Then I went to a wedding. I got hammered that night, like really hammered. My guy had the things the next day where you can get an IV of vitamins and stuff like that. And so I do that, and the secret is you don't feel hungover, but you're still very much drunk. You know what I mean? And I'm on the flight now, listening to the album, going all sorts of different places, pulling things, and like realizing more and more stuff is supporting this theory from Instagram posts that Soundwave put out. I think it was Soundwave of like the Matrix and the red pill and the blue pill. Choose this way, it leads to one thing. Choose the blue. And I look at the album covers. Kendrick had red on one. There was a blue one that surfaced on Spotify later, corresponding with the red and blue pill, the different directions. And all this stuff starts to come to me. And I spent, my wife at the time must have thought I was crazy because I was like a mad scientist, just feverish on the plane. I didn't talk, I didn't eat, I didn't drink anything. I got in the car, I'm still doing it. I asked her to drive. I get home, I finish it at like 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. I put it up and I close my computer and I go to bed.
Put it up meaning you published and shared it.
I published and shared it with the headline that the rumors were true. Kendrick Lamar did release 2 albums. And then the copy being, we just didn't know it. And then the next day I wake up and you're like, Reggie broke the internet. And I was like, huh? And I looked and we were at just an obscene number. I think it was like 400,000 uniques in 12 hours or something crazy like that. And later on, Rodney Carmichael from NPR like gave us props for cracking the code. Kendrick himself acknowledged that it was meant to be played both directions. MTV linked to us like, we got a lot of props for that. There was a Genius page dedicated to it. It was pretty dope.
It was incredible, and it just shows that an album can be out for weeks, literally, and still need context. And I love that. And so that sets the table really well. Kendrick clearly likes to put detonating smart bombs in his albums, and I don't know that he makes a game out of it, but I think the concept and the level of depth to his reflection merits layers. You got to just like, as all artists right now are finding their voice by going to new places, Kendrick takes it to another level. So our last podcast, we broke down the new Black Star album, No Fear of Time. Really enjoyed that episode, and we taped in the middle of the week, and we usually don't talk about it, but I think it's important as we get into this conversation to say that, this is Sunday afternoon, 2 days after the album's dropped. And last weekend, you and I decided we wouldn't do a podcast because we thought, we sensed, we knew, we suspected that Kendrick, there would be something before the arrival of the album. And it was nice. We both went about our business, and Sunday night, Mother's Day, at 8:00, East Coast, somewhere in there, we get The Heart Volume 5. Talk to me about your initial reaction, because at the time you were able to watch it, close to real time of it dropping, and I was not. I was committed at that point.
So I was with my girlfriend on Mother's Day. She's a mom, and so I was celebrating her, cooking dinner, the whole nine. And she tells me, because she's on IG, gets notifications, Kendrick just dropped a music video, and I'm like, what? It was just so shocking. But at this time, we know the album release date. We know that Kendrick releases the Heart series in advance of albums. And so I knew it was going to come at some point, and I just had this feeling it was going to happen on Mother's Day. In fact, I had asked her in the car to check Oklama.com about 2 hours before that to see if there was any updates, and there wasn't anything. So when it came out, I was nervous. Like literally my hands were shaking as I pressed play. And I watched the video, and, you never know what to expect from Kendrick. Like, he could come out and be completely left, or he could do something that's really accessible. This one was, I think, much more immediately accessible, given the Marvin Gaye sample. And so I'm listening to it at first, and musically, sonically, it's just unbelievable. It's incredible. Like, he snaps and he does a flow that I hadn't heard from him in a while. It reminded me of what he did in the BT Cipher, the one with the Shook Ones, Mob Deep. And
Yeah.
he just like spazzes. And also like the Isaiah Rashad song, What's Wrong? Like it was,
Yeah.
is that kind of energy, that like aggressive, like I'm back kind of energy. And so
Repetitive, syncopated flow like that.
exactly, exactly. And he starts off this really calmly saying, that he wants to thank all his people, and but then as soon as he starts rapping, his energy completely changes. And it wasn't until about halfway through that I started looking at it and realizing, wait a minute, this dude's face is changing. Is that OJ? What? Oh, Kanye? Like, and so I'm looking at it, and this is where the conflict happens for you and me, right? Like we want to be first, but we also want to provide quality. And I'll be the first to say that I didn't feel like I provided quality with the post. I got it really early, but I wasn't able to sit back and analyze it the way I would have wanted to, just because it was such a big moment. Hopefully we'll make up for that now, but it comes on and I'm floored by it. But what was your reaction?
Yeah, mine was there. And honestly, we talk about Kendrick being deliberate. And in some ways, I feel as though he appreciates, the contextual clues that folks like Dissect and hopefully AFH provide. But there's a lot of hot takes out there, and there's a lot of people, that I made a joke. Like, there's a lot of folks that just want knee-jerk stuff. And I looked at it at first, and I was like, he dropped this at 8 o'clock on Mother's Day, because presumably there's things happening, on both coasts at this time, and only the fans can get to it. Only my people, there's no filter. It's just Kendrick giving it to you straight, not late. And let's not forget, that was one of the messages that we've gotten from Oklama leading up to this album. If you hear something about this album, it will only come from PG Lang, Kendrick Lamar, Dave Free, and I'm extending that. They were more succinct about it. So I really think that a big thing that's happened with this is just cutting out the middleman, or the middle woman, because oftentimes the media in that crawl, that claw to be first, gets things wrong. I thought your article was good, but what really blew me away is, again, with several days' time, what you came up with, and much has been said about why it's OJ and Kanye and Justy, but you've really broken something down. So for anyone that's listened to us this far as we speak on this, this was news to me when you told me your thoughts on each verse and the direction of those verses. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of this started to open up for me with the album. And so what we've learned about the Heart series is, Kendrick has started releasing these songs ahead of his albums, and they tend to serve as kind of a palate cleanser to rid your thoughts of whatever you've heard in the past. But also afterwards, when you go back and look at them, they contain a lot of clues of what you can expect from the album. And so for this one, I was able to go back and look at the video in a different way once I started hearing the album, seeing the artwork and things like that. So one of the questions you would ask, at the time was there significance to him releasing this on Mother's Day? And, or why now? Why in secret? I think he did it deliberately on Mother's Day, because as we saw from the album cover that was released a couple days later, featuring him and his partner, Whitney, and his now 2 children. Kendrick is now a father of 2. He announced that to the world via the photograph.
And family ties. There was an allusion there in those lyrics last year.
Yeah, Dave Free got 2 buns in the oven. Exactly. Yeah. And so it makes you think that, okay, he's celebrating the mothers in his life. Whitney plays a very prominent role on the album, and his mom is, the subject of some really critical songs too. So I think it was intentional that he did that. And it's also intentional that he released the album on Friday the 13th. We'll get to that. And my boy, Brendan Henderson, who I promised I would give a shout out to this, because he's the one who connected the dots for me on this. So he does it on Mother's Day. Whitney's a big part of it. And the video, when I start to go back and look at it. So one of the first realizations I had after I did the article was, not only is Nipsey Hussle portrayed visually in the video, but Kendrick is actually rapping from his perspective in the entire third verse. A lot of people came up with that theory. I think everything supports it, him mentioning Sam, his brother, and all that other stuff. But verse 1 and verse 2 are different than what I think people realize as well. So again, everything Kendrick does is intentional. And so he's looking off to the side the whole time in verse 1. And I'm like, why is he looking off to the side? Now, if you go back in time, Kendrick Lamar has talked in interviews, and I've been looking for the links, but he's said many times, and he may have even told me this personally, that actually I should go back and look at our interviews. It might be in one of our interviews that the first thing he would do in the morning is get up and look at himself in the mirror. And he would often do this for 20 minutes, 30 minutes at a time. And it wasn't like an egotistical, vain thing. It was him like dissecting himself, him like taking stock of who he is as a man, almost like meditating and like thinking about it. So if you go and look at the Heart video, I believe that in the first verse, he's actually looking in the mirror. And, he says things to himself when you start to go back and watch the video while he's doing that really start to make you think that, okay, he's talking to himself in the mirror. Now, on the album, the last song on the second body of 9 songs is called Mirror. And he mentions mirror many times on the album. And so, again, the Heart being the thing that's completed after the album, he intentionally goes back and pulls out clues to include in that. And I think he supported that visually too. And if you start to read listen to the lyrics as he's looking at himself, he's partly talking to himself, but also, part of it is directed at people, but he's having a conversation with himself about how he feels about the culture and things like that. Verse 2, then he turns and fixes his gaze directly on the audience. And now he's talking to us, and he's giving us a sermon, a lecture, his words, however you want to call it. And it's really a lot about cancel culture. And this to me is a direct continuation of the conversation he started on Mortal Man with himself and eventually Tupac. Shout out to Mickey Fax, who kind of put this together first too. I'm not sure if he was talking about this verse specifically or the entire song, but that second verse, Kendrick is not only talking about, how we look down, we build our heroes up and then we tear them down, but he's showing a series of people who this has happened to, so he starts with O.J. Simpson, and then it turns to Kanye, and then it's Jussie Smollett, and then it becomes Will Smith. And with the Will Smith part, he talks about hurting people. And, this will come out on the album too. There's lots of connections here. And so, the Heart took on a whole different meaning for me when I was able to see the artwork and listen to the album and really understand the intention that he put behind it. But again, like Kendrick, just, he is the master of leaving clues.
The Will Smith, reference obviously would mean that this was made, between the closing days of March and now. So it's not, and I would imagine with the Heart, those are things that are probably made in the moment, just looking at the history of that, and they still thread to a completed album. But it's interesting. I mean, one of the things we're talking about is how long was he sitting on this body of work, and when did he finally say, done, I'm not touching it anymore? The other point of note, as we're talking about the meeting of Oklama, the what's said in the video before he starts spitting of my people, which affirms that theory of just what this communication is about and what his headspace is in making this music. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, he starts out, he says, as I get a little older, I realize life is perspective, right? And perspective is something that comes up a lot in the album. And also, the perspective you have on yourself in the mirror is different than your perspective in real life too. And he says, and my perspective may differ from yours. I want to say thank you to everyone that's been down with me, all my fans, all my beautiful fans, anyone who's ever gave me a listen. That's going to come up too. And he says, all my people. So the last thing he says before he starts rapping is my people, supporting that Oklama theory, and then going back to what you said also about looking in retrospect. If you look at the statement that he made in August, he says, the morning rides keep me on a hill of silence. We see later on that on the second 9, Silent Hill is the title of a song. And he mentions silent hills and valleys throughout too. He talks about going without a phone and secluding himself from society, cutting himself off, from people is a big theme of the album too. He says, love, loss, and grief have disturbed my comfort zone, but the glimmers of God speak through my music and family. And again, family is just such an important thing. So now all the pieces are starting to come together as we go into the album.
Absolutely. And I really like the point that you've made of, Kendrick's rapped to himself before, that mirror thing, you want to Pimp a Butterfly. I mean, other MCs have done that, where they've literally rapped to themselves, kind of, self-therapy, but Kendrick's done it on another level. And I really, after you shared that with me, I rewatched the video, and I think you're definitely on with that. One of the things that I have struggled with historically, and maybe it's a TDE thing, is artwork. Artwork has often meant less to me since we've moved to a virtual space. One day in the last week, I guess it was probably Wednesday, the artwork or what could be the artwork dropped for this album. And you were excited about it. You were in the middle of a crazy day. And I said something cynical about it of like, I want to be careful. And there's other forces at play of, if you talk about an artist too much, especially for a very curated lens like AFH, sometimes I'm worried that the meat, important things like the conversation we're having, can get lost in the sauce. But I'm starting to, really take the artwork of this album to a whole other place. And you've helped me see that. You mentioned maternity on Mother's Day. Artwork, he has his partner Whitney on there. He reveals that he is a father in the artwork. Are there other things that you want to talk about when you saw the artwork, or that have now made sense to you as we lead into pressing play on the album?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say one last thing on the mirror concept. Kendrick talked about himself in the mirror on the song You on To Pimp a Butterfly, and he has a very, very intense conversation where he's literally blaming himself for not being there for the younger brother of a friend of his who he promised to look after, who ends up dying, Chad Keaton. And so again, these mirror conversations happen quite a bit. And part of what made me think about what he was doing was his mention of perspective, but then also I thought back to an artist we were talking about earlier, D'Angelo. And so D'Angelo, when he put out his Untitled video, it's just him standing without a shirt on, and women are going crazy and stuff like that. And he's singing, looking directly into the camera. And it seems like a cool concept, like just plain, stripped down, literally. But the rumor that came out later on was, look at that video from the perspective of if D'Angelo is receiving oral sex while he's doing that video. Did you ever know that? Had you ever?
You might have told me, or I read it somewhere, but yeah, absolutely. And it makes a whole different.
It's a whole different video when you look at it that way. So that's part of what made me think, okay, here we go. So the artwork.
One thing I want to add, though, too, as we speak about artwork, you caught something else in the Heart video that I think needs mention, regarding attire and background.
Yeah. So he's wearing a white T-shirt and a black bandana. The black bandana, I think, is a clear nod to Nipsey, and really he embodies Nipsey in that final verse. But the other thing about there's 2 bridges between Damn and Miss Morale and Big Steppers visually in the Heart. So on Damn, he's wearing a white T-shirt He's wearing a white t-shirt in the video, and he's wearing a white t-shirt in the cover for Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. But also on Damn, the color is this like crimson red, almost like a blood red behind him. And it's the same color, or almost exact same color, on the video too. And so again, it's meant to be a palate cleanser, but it's the bridge. It's the thing between the two albums that connects. So it's part bridge, part palate cleanser, part preview of what to expect from it.
Yeah, all the needles are threaded. And we've seen the black bandana thing since Family Ties. I mean, that seems to be, and we saw it during the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, you know, as Kendrick, who is very deliberate about color, you know, even his, I forget if it was his Nike deal or his Reebok deal, where he had red and blue sneakers that was, you know, to mirror the street organizations of LA, then places like Compton, you know, color always matters. So yeah, I get you. And I agree with you. I think especially for the Nipsey part, that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, it's different. And the only reason I think I was cynical too is there have been times in the past, it was the Blank Face LP campaign from Schoolboy Q, remember, where he initially said the artwork would be the crying Michael Jordan. I think there was one involving Trump. And it was one of the few times that Ambrosia for Heads really kind of got, you know, with a trolling campaign, which is fun for fans, but we always want our site to be exact and authentic. So when you saw the Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, or as we'll talk about, the artwork, initial thoughts and thoughts that have developed later?
Yeah, I mean, I was cautious too, because you've really trained me that, you know, we shouldn't jump the gun with these pictures. But, you know, I thought it would be odd that he not do it. We did the heads, we put it on Instagram. But when you start to look at the cover, there are a few things that are very striking about it. First of all, it blew me away that this was Kendrick and his family. Like I said earlier, Kendrick, TDE dudes are very, very private about their personal lives. You know, we've seen Whitney in photos. You start to go back, you'll see her with him at award shows and things like that. They've been together for years and years and years. And so it's certainly not a secret, their relationship. And, you know, I think it came out in 2015 or something like that, that they were engaged. It wouldn't surprise me if they were actually married and no one knew. But to see them and in such intimate poses, you know, him holding his baby, first of all, because everyone knew that he had a daughter, you know, a 2-year-old daughter. There had been no mention of any son. So this is how he announces to the world that he has a son. And I suspect that, you know, before Pusha T stole his thunder, that's how it would have gone down with Drake too, which with March 14th. Kendrick was able to do it and control the narrative the way he wanted to. But then you start looking at things like the room that they're in, the way they're dressed. It's super plain. There's nothing ornate about it whatsoever. And I think it's just reinforcing this notion that he's living a very simple life. I don't think this is his home by any stretch. No. There's no electronics whatsoever in there. And so, you know, reinforces his notion of cutting himself off from society with phones and things like that. And then when you start to look closely, there's two things that he's wearing, which are incredibly symbolic. The first is he's got a crown of thorns on his head. And this goes back to this notion that Kendrick is the savior of hip hop. People are always asking, where's Kendrick when, you know, the protests of 2020 happened? When Donald Trump was elected, people looked to Kendrick to give them guidance on how they should view the world. This has been foisted upon him. He's never asked for it. Sometimes he takes it on, but he's very clearly signaling that he understands at least how he's viewed this crown of thorns. The second thing is much more subtle, and that's the gun that's tucked into the waist of his pants. And I took that to mean that, you know, he's going to protect his family by all means necessary, by any means necessary. You know, I started thinking about Malcolm X and that photo of him looking at the gun, looking out the window with the big gun. And there's another image that surfaced recently, which reinforced that, which is insane. So the name of the photographer is, do you remember her name?
Yeah, let me
Ronelle Madrano. So her name is Ronelle Madrano. She had posted the artwork at the same time that Whitney and Kendrick did. If you go on her Instagram, though, there's another photo of Kendrick that is not surfaced yet. And again, this is Sunday, the 15th, so maybe it'll pop up. But this was posted by her on Friday, not posted by Kendrick. A photo of Kendrick in a chair in another room, also very plain, no electronics or anything like that. And this time he's laying down almost like in the down position where he's slumped over on a chair, almost like collapsed. He's got the crown on again. And to me, it signifies that the crown is now heavy, and heavy is the head of he who wears the crown. So there's some symbolism there. He's now replaced his khakis for jeans. You can't see whether or not there's a gun in his pants still, but over in the corner of the room is a rifle, is a shotgun. And so now we're getting the full on Malcolm X imagery. And, again, if this album is about family, Kendrick is showing that he will do anything he needs to do to protect his family, which is also ironic as to why he would put his family on the cover and put them out into such public scrutiny, but he's controlling the narrative the way he wants to.
It's interesting. A friend of mine said to me this week, the crown's a little much. And I didn't think so. Especially when, this is King Kendrick, King Kunta. Obviously, the crown of thorns is, in my estimation, a reference to Christ in the Bible. You look at Section 80, which was my real jump off point for Kendrick 11 years ago. And there's a clip to a gun, there's a Bible, and I always thought that was one of the coolest pieces of art for an album that never came out physically. I have a physical copy of it, but it was just a printout in a slim case that TDE used to sell at the shows. But, because it was like, that's your nightstand. That's what defines your life. That's what you keep next to you. You don't see the gun, but you see the clip. And here you go, boom, a decade plus later, and there's still a bed. Just so happens, your partner and your two children, are in the room now. There's still a gun, and there's still this level of spirituality there. And I'm probably reading into it too much, but to me, it's all part of a continuum.
Yeah. So I look at these two photos and I start to think these are two album covers. There's not just one, because you had, broken the news to me when you looked at Oklama.com. You want to talk about that? You wrote the story on it. There's an image that surfaced a couple weeks ago.
And breaking the story is probably a bit, I was, in the first 10 minutes or so, and I just happened to be around, but, one of the cryptic clues that we've seen since August of 2021 were these just, was a photo of Kendrick holding a book and holding two CDs, handwritten old school style CDRs with Big Steppers and Mr. Morale written on them. And yeah, I let you know, and here we are 5 years removed from kind of being played with a little bit on Damn being a double album, which it is, but it's all on one disc. Now this, like, and part of me, we covered the story. I think you and I had a quick huddle about it. But is Kendrick, playing with this knee-jerk reaction again, or are we legitimately going to have a double album? So yeah, and that's, you and I speculate. I think we speculated on the last episode, the Black Star episode, about this, talked about some of the great albums in history, double albums, and that was that. And then once again, you, especially now that we have these two bodies of work in front of us, you've done a little bit more decoding.
Yeah, I went back and looked at that photo. So I had a theory. You and I talked about what does it mean to have a double album? Like, in the era of playlisting where you can literally have 45 songs. I think Chris Brown has got an album that's like 40 something songs.
Yeah.
Kanye's Donda is over 2 hours.
Ray Sherman. Yeah.
Yeah. What does it mean to have a double album? Kendrick did it differently though. So when we get the album, there are 2 bodies of 9 songs. So clearly he's making a statement that these are meant to be separate bodies of work. The question then becomes, which one is Mr. Morale and which one is the Big Steppers? Because the first body of 9 has got multiple references to the Big Steppers on it, including a song, Worldwide Steppers, even though it's called Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And then the second body of 9 has got the song literally called Mr. Morale and a bunch of different references to it. So it says to me that that maybe these are in reverse order, as was the case with Damn. And I've also heard that To Pimp a Butterfly might have some propensities to do that too. And so then I looked at the image, and it had Big Steppers on top and Mr. Morale on the bottom, but then it had the book, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. So it said to me, okay, cool. It's 2 albums. I thought these 2 images represented the artwork for both. And so on the one, you got Kendrick by himself. That's Mr. Morale. And the other one, you got him with his family. I believe that those are meant to represent the Big Steppers. So yeah, there were clues that started to come out with the presentation of the album too.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about that a little bit further. And after you presented that, I wholeheartedly believe it. It makes total sense. You and I have speculated what, stepping means. I think even down to your point about the Super Bowl is a good one. So let's talk about what comes to mind a little bit here when you press play.
Yeah, when again, so I'm sitting in my bed in the dark with those headphones on, and I press play, and the first song comes on, and I'm like, this is something
united in grief. You started
United in grief, and I'm like, this is completely different than what I would have expected. It sounds nothing like Damn. It sounds nothing like The Heart Part 5, which I think was also sonically closer to what we heard on Damn. I don't know what to expect. So immediately I suspended any expectations, and I've said for a long time, I think you and I've talked about this, that I thought that Damn was Kendrick's Purple Rain moment. I've thought for a long time that Kendrick and Drake were the Prince and Michael Jackson of hip hop of our era. Prince was super artistic, highly respected as an artist, played all different instruments, like put together complex music, the whole nine. But in the middle of Purple Rain, his artistry converged with where the public was, in terms of popular consumption. It became the biggest album of the year, sold like 16 million copies or something like that. The accompanying film, gigantic. Prince is the biggest artist in the world. That was kind of a one-time event. Now, Prince was important and big at all times, but he was never as big as he was commercially with Purple Rain. That was the climax for him. Michael Jackson, on the other hand, Thriller, Bad, Victory, all the stuff he's done, he's been gigantic. But and Thriller is a masterful album, but not really viewed in the same way that Prince work was. Not like A Sign of the Times, critically, and stuff like that. So with Drake and Kendrick, it's similar. Drake has indisputably been the monster on the charts in all genres for the last 10 years. There's nobody bigger, and we've talked about this extensively. Kendrick had incredible success with Damn, commercially and critically, won the Pulitzer. But this to me sounds very much like what Prince did after Purple Rain. So he had all these expectations on him. People probably expected a sequel to Purple Rain. He does a hard left and puts out Around the World in a Day, which is a complete sonic departure. There's only one radio-friendly song in Raspberry Beret. Like, it is Prince being super artistic. And for me, this was what I heard with Kendrick when I first started listening to the album. You had some thoughts about that too. You had some thoughts about radio singles.
Yeah, I think that, just as Kendrick is trying to box out the knee-jerk, critics and theorists and all of that, I think that honestly, for a guy who is limiting his messages to very careful singles and albums, some guesswork, radio is null and void. I think that, and you even said that. I remember with swimming pools, with you said Compton, the Recipe, like the records that we heard in 2012 on radio never did Kendrick justice. I think that changed a little bit with We Gonna Be All Right. There have been some other moments. I always used to marvel at the fact that up until 2017, Kendrick's biggest song on Spotify was Mad City. a song that never had a video, that features MC8, kind of a perceived by many as a legacy artist. Like Kendrick has always defied the tools that are going to decide who he is. He gives you that statement. His videos give you that statement. And this album, I'm in Philadelphia right now, and I didn't listen to terrestrial radio this weekend. But other than the news of like, hey, let's play the Heart Five, I cannot imagine that there is a single on this album. I received nothing from Interscope that said, here's the clean version of this or whatever. So yeah, I think he's deliberately defying it. And I also think, by and large, this album, and I think this has been true of J. Cole in recent years, it is about the MC. Like you made that point of talking to Ninth Wonder and being like, oh my God, the beat changes. And then Ninth was like, Liz, did you hear what he's saying? I think as a culture, one of our challenges is we often just get caught up in the vibe or the beat, the production. And Kendrick is a great reminder of the MC and what's being said mattering most. So, perfect segue. United in Grief starts off with some powerful words that matter. I hope you find some peace of mind in this lifetime. And a woman says, tell them the truth. Can you speak to the impact of that after listening and digesting this album a bit?
Yeah, so I'm now trained based on what I learned, with Damn to say, okay, what order are we supposed to listen to this project in? We've gotten all the clues that they're in different order than what the name suggests. The Big Steppers is the first volume of 9, and Mr. Morales is second. And so, does that mean that we're supposed to listen to it differently? So, the first time I listened to it like in the order in which it was received, and had one experience. But it was very shortly thereafter, the next day, that I actually started listening to it in the different order with the second 9 first. So when you hear United in Grief, the first words are, I hope you find some peace of mind in this lifetime. And then Whitney says, tell them the truth. Now that's an opening that makes a lot of sense given the fact that Kendrick has been gone for 5 years, what he means to people, the whole 9. And then Kendrick's first words are in line with that command. He says, I've been going through something 1,855 days. I've been going through something. Be afraid. So, of course, I did the math, and 1,855 days is 5 years and 30 days ago, which is April 14th, 2017. If you counting back from that date, that's the day the Damn came out. So Kendrick is literally saying, I'm going to catch you up on, the 5 years of my life that have happened since the last time I delivered you my word, my music, which is crazy, right? Like, so it sounds to me like, okay, this is fitting for an opening. It makes a lot of sense. Kendrick talks about luxuries in the song he's indulged in. This is a running theme where he kind of has this like inner conflict about materialism and whether or not to embrace it versus like living a more righteous life. He references Chad, his friend who was killed again. There's a lot that he's packing onto this song, which makes you think that he's catching you up. And it's very similar to, what he's talked about on The Heart, about the materialism. And, I do this for my culture and let y'all know what a brother looks like in a bulletproof Rover. Like there's a lot of overlap there. And so it makes a lot of sense. And when you listen to it in that order, the last song that you hear is Mirror. And so now I'm thinking, okay, cool. What does that say?
Of the 18 songs, of the 2
Of the 18 songs, right? So now I'm thinking, okay, first thing you hear when you press play, last thing you hear before it goes off. So last one is Mirror. And, this is where I start thinking about Kendrick looking into the mirror on The Heart and how this has been a clue for that. And, he revisits themes of that on that too. He talks about, seeing life from a redirected point of view, which is, similar to like, having different perspective on the heart. And it seems like the mirror is kind of like a metaphor for hip hop and the pressures he's been facing as its involuntary savior, cue the crown. And then he talks about, if rap music is the subject, or we are the subject, he says, you won't grow waiting on me. So basically he's saying, listen, like, I'm not the one who's going to give you all the answers. You got to figure that out for yourself. Like, and he says, maybe it's time to break it off, run away from the culture to follow my heart. Now, he's talked about the culture several times in the heart. He says, run away from the culture to follow my heart. So this to me is a clear, like, addendum to the stuff he's talking about in the heart. And in the end, he says, sorry, I didn't save the world, my friend. I was too busy building mine again. I choose me. I choose me. I'm sorry. I choose me. And so at the end of the culture, he said, at the end of the heart, he says, I want you, presumably meaning the culture. He goes through all the things that are wrong with the culture, but like Common did, and hip and I met this girl when I was 3 years old. Yeah. I used to love her. Right? I used to love her. That Common did, and I used to love her. There's a love-hate relationship that people have, but they ultimately embrace the culture. And it seemed like he was doing that on the Heart Part 5. But by the time you get to the end of the mirror, he's saying, nope, I'm sorry. I choose me. I choose me. And so that was a really interesting way. And I think it works. What do you think in terms of the order?
Yeah, I mean, I think you 100% nailed it. And when you stop the album there, and then you have to go to the next disc, so you go from Mirror to United in Grief, it makes a lot of sense, because the Big Steppers really deals with what's been going on in Kendrick's life, like why he needed these 5 years, why he chose himself. And yeah, I think that nails it. And I love it. Hip hop won't grow if we solely depend on Kendrick Lamar. And culture can mean many things too. It can be family, it can be Black folks, it can be heads, it can be all of these things. But he's saying, like take the responsibility off of me. And even that, I think, underpins what you see in the artwork again. Like, this is what this man has been doing, and he has really been out of the headlines. And he speaks a lot about a condemnation of social media, of virtual signaling on social media, and these folks that really kind of put themselves on pedestals. I think it really, really, really makes a lot of sense. And it wasn't until you kind of broke it down for me that I could really differentiate the two albums, because there's a lot of heavy stuff on both of them. Yeah. So that raises the question, where should we go now? Should we keep on the on the Big Steppers disc and go to Count Me Out, or do you want to stay in Mr. Morale?
Yeah, so that's when it gets interesting, right? Because it does make sense logically to listen to it in the order that it's delivered to us. Like, the beginning and the end are meaningful and make sense to us. But let's say you just decide, just on a whim, to try it the other way, and you start with Mr. Morale, which begins with Count Me Out. And so with that song, it begins with a singer named Sam Dew singing, "We may not know which way to go on this dark road." Now, it's got this weird kind of like church choir, like, type orchestral, like sound, just like Beacon had in Blood, where he told us, you decide, are we going to live or die? He literally told us, you can decide the order in which you want to listen to it, and the story that you want to. So now this sounds very, very similar. We may not know which way to go on this dark road. It's like, here we go again. So then I'm thinking, all righty then, and in between, and then he says, all these hoes make it difficult. So in between those two statements, though, Eckhart Tolle, who's a philosopher and a spiritual advisor, starts to speak, and he says, Mr. Duckworth. Now, last time we heard Kendrick called Duckworth was the end of Damn. And so now it's starting to feel like not only is it the same trope of, the telling us a direction, but he's literally picking up where he left off with Duckworth. So now, like, my head is starting to spin, right? And so, if you then start to listen to the last song on Mr. Morale, it's the Ghostface Killer featured song, Purple Hearts.
Purple Hearts.
Yeah.
Summer Walker too.
Yeah. And so now I'm listening. Okay, what are Kendrick's last words on that song? And he says, if God be the source, then I'm the plug talking. So now he's saying that he's the messenger of God, delivering the word of God. That sounds like Oklama to me, right? And so now I'm thinking, it makes sense in this direction too. So my thought is that, my thought is that it can be played in either order, and you'll take, it'll make sense in either order. I lean toward Mr. Morale being first. That's what the book said, even when he had the two separate CDs. That's the title of the album. And we'll get into why a little bit later. I think that things in the Big Steppers make more sense when you listen to Mr. Morale first. I think he colors in the lines a bit more for us. But the reality is there's elements of both on both CDs. I think that Mr. Morale is about Kendrick and self-reflection and what he's been through as an individual over the last 5 years. I think that the Big Steppers is about Kendrick within his family unit and what that has represented, both, him as a father, but also his dynamic with Whitney. And I think that, there are bits and pieces of each, because in the two different sets, because Kendrick is at the center of both. But as a whole, I think that that's the framework. Mr. Morale being about Kendrick alone, and the Big Steppers about being him within the context of family. And we're supposed to listen to it in that order.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really insightful. And after you shared that with me before this conversation, if I listen in that order, it's an illuminating listen. And I think that, there's a lot of overlap. These two albums sonically are not that different, and there's a reason why in the age when the double album, at least as we knew it in the 90s, late 90s, has ended, there's a reason we're getting these both at the same time. And Kendrick makes that an interesting journey. Almost, it's curious to me that there's the two CDs in the book, because it's almost as if these are verses in diaries. It's like, one, let me take audit, like you said, of my family with the Big Steppers, and that would explain the artwork. Whereas Mr. Morale is me, especially when Kendrick, the word morale, Kendrick, you set that against Kendrick taking all of the space, being silent, being, definitive, a little bit apologetic of like, I can't help you guys with everything. It's so interesting and it makes a lot of sense. And then you said this, but just to remind the way that he was holding those two discs in that photo. And as we know, the Oklama rollout, everything, these are glimpses and a bit of a puzzle to put together. So everything's deliberate. There you go.
He's giving us breadcrumbs. I also think there's a bit of a play on Mr. Morale with the Mr. Moral too, and the weight of what he's feeling. Like I said, when you look at the cover of Mr. Morale, he is literally like almost glued down because of the weight of that crown. And, I think that the self-reflection is really heavy. When you start to listen to it sonically, it's a really intimate really intimate album. We'll get into some of those songs, but it's also, the lyrics are kind of like heightened by minimal use of drums. You don't hear any drums at all on a lot of songs. And it's not until like Auntie Diaries starts that you really start to hear drums, and they're still kind of muted. So yeah, I think that's the direction to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and also too, I think your point about the moral is interesting, because Kendrick confesses things on this album, which has been in the news. People run with that. But also, I often think that Kendrick is mischaracterized. I think folks often focus on the good kid part of like, oh, he grew up in the chaos of Compton, but he was in it, not of it. And again, I think that comes back to the weapon, the pistol in the back pocket, and just some of the things that he said throughout his life. Like, no, there is a moral conflict there. But anyway, so we have these two albums. There's a lot going on. You tell me, where do you want to go now?
I think we start with Mr. Morale. We start with Count Me Out.
Perfect.
So we talked about, Eckhart there. And, the song is really about, Kendrick really just talking about the struggles he's had. He talks about infidelity, which you just mentioned, the pressures of fame. shutting down emotionally and mentally. He talks about dishonesty and more. And interestingly, his relationship with the mirror surfaces first in this song too. He says, "Look myself in the mirror, Amityville, ain't seen nothing scarier." And so, right away, again, he's cluing us into the heart, where he's been looking in the mirror. And the fact that he sees something scary, shows kind of the mental space that he's in. Amityville Horror. There was a family that was killed in a house in New York in the 70s. They made it into a book and a movie, which became a cult classic. So he's saying he's his own worst. He can be his own worst enemy. And he says, "Ain't nobody but the mirror looking for the fall off," which
Boom.
is a really, really deep thing, And but by the end of the song, it's clear that he's fighting demons, and he asks if any of us is having similar struggles too. So it's a very deep song. But what was your take on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think you broke that down really well. And again, you have that mirror reference of self accountability. Of these 18 songs, the next track, Crown, is one of my favorites. Over the years, you and I, most days, at least 320 a year, text each other one song, in addition to our just conversations about music, life, and hip hop. And I love the canon of Stress records. I love Organized Confusion and Cannibal Ox and Tupac and Joe Budden pre-Slaughterhouse. Like, I love those records. And Kendrick with Crown has made already one of the best records of being overwhelmed. And it speaks to that of, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. And, the refrain throughout the song is, I can't please everybody. And you and I have spoken a lot about over the years of Atlas holding this globe, and Kendrick with 5 years of anticipation, with all that is put on him. He's just telling you, like, I'm gonna do me. And this being the album, this being Mr. Morale, to your theory about Kendrick looking within, it makes a lot of sense. And it could have been, before his children came, but like, I'm going to do me. And we know there are a lot of detachments and a lot of crossroads in Kendrick's life right now with what little we know, what we have in the music and what we've had since last August. And this song really marks a pivot point. And I think it's not by accident, that the next joint is Silent Hill, which speaks to that taking time alone, meditating, all of that. But, what would you add about Crown?
I think that your friend was right about the image, that it was a bit much, in terms of the imagery, but that's the whole point, is that the crown is too much, it's too much for Kendrick, and he talks about the conflict and responsibilities there, he talks about fame and wealth, and that he's expected to give money to people. And even though he does, as soon as he says no, all the other times where he's been more generous have been forgotten. He's busy and he gives time to his loved ones, but he has to, it seemed like, make sure that they know he's made the sacrifice, which really kind of takes away from it. He talks about how fickle the love from the public can be. And this is something that like keeps, surfacing for him. Interestingly, he says that, keeping his music in rotation is a sign of love for him. And that also kind of throws back to the heart, where he says, "I want to say thank you that to everyone that's been down with me, all my fans, anyone who's ever gave me a listen, And by the end of the song, I think he resigns himself to the fact that, carrying the weight of the crown is unsustainable. And, like you said, you can't please everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And Silent Hill is an extension of that, of like, I'm gonna break, and the song, well, first of all, too, interestingly enough, of this clip of songs, Kodak Black, and we're gonna talk about some lyrics about Kodak later, but was he somebody that surprised you when you saw the guest personnel?
He was. I thought it was super weird. They're not similar sonically at all, and you don't connect those two substantively. But I think there are things that come out over the course of the album which make it make a ton of sense. So yeah, I learned, in listening to Dissect, that even Kendrick's choice of featured artists is very, very intentional. When he had Loyalty, he had Rihanna on that, and she had just gone through, losing, a huge chunk of money to someone that she trusted, her accountant. And so, I think Kodak is on here for a very specific reason too. Yeah, it's pretty dope.
Yeah, and again, I mean, with being the savior of hip hop and all of this, I like that Kendrick, picked somebody who, again, I mean, in the face of cancel culture, Kodak, is somebody who's regularly in the headlines, not always for great things. So yeah, it seems super deliberate. I'm curious, just as an aside, with this notion of Silent Hill, I wonder where Kendrick is these days. Like, some of the folks that I know at Empire, the distributor and label, were in Ghana last night, and I couldn't tell, but it appeared that Kendrick might be in Ghana right now. But I'm like, where can you, if you're Kendrick Lamar, be silent on a hill? When can you go for a meditating morning ride? Be that a bike, be that a car ride? Like, how do you have peace of mind? And I wouldn't be surprised. You and I spoke about Yassine Bey kind of being an international citizen. If Kendrick's in another place entirely, and has been for a lot of the pandemic, especially with the privacy to have two children and not, be paparazzi'd out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of California he lives in. I won't say the exact area, but it's clearly a place where I guess people are used to seeing him enough. And he's also like, the thing about Kendrick is you can be in a room with him and not even realize it. He has the ability of being able to hide himself in public. The way he dresses, the way he carries himself is not like, he's not bombastic about these things. It's always been striking to me how different he is on stage than how he is like in person. So he can be that dude riding around on a bike and a baseball hat and a t-shirt and like in the script, yeah, some sunglasses. No one have any idea. You know what I mean?
Like Andre 3000 standing on a corner in Philly playing the
clarinet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, next up is the Savior interlude, and these interludes are really interesting. But I wanted to ask you, you've forgotten more about philosophy than I'll ever learn. Anything contextually that you should share about Eckhart Tolle?
He has this book called The Power of Now, and it's all about just being present. It's about blocking out all the noise and distractions of life. Some people, he's very polarizing. Some people think that he is a spiritual guru and a genius. Other people think that, he might be insane, out of his mind. He's supposedly spent a couple years on a park bench just looking at things and just marveling at the beauty of the world, but he's been embraced by Oprah and a lot of other people as kind of like a self-help guru. And so he's definitely got the ear of some very credible, powerful people.
So thank you. And on this interlude, he says, if you derive your sense of identity from being a victim, let's say bad things were done to you when you were a child, and you develop a sense of self that is based on the bad things that happened to you, ... That is a huge point. Can you speak to why that is so deliberate and why that matters on an interlude?
Yeah, it matters because it comes up again a little bit later on Mother Sober, Kendrick's song, which I think is the centerpiece of this Mr. Morale album. Kendrick talks about the fact that when he was younger, I think like 5 or so, he had a cousin and people believed that his cousin had molested him. Now, there's a question of who the cousin is. He mentions like 3 cousins repeatedly on this album. One is Baby Keem, who he talks about as maybe perpetuating some of the cycles that Kendrick is trying to break in terms of like being caught up in materialism and the violence that's accompanied his upbringing and things like that. Kendrick seems to be a bit more advanced as the older cousin, almost like a big brother type. So he mentions that quite a bit. He also talks a lot about Keem's mother and the contentious relationship seemingly that Keem and his mom had that was potentially exacerbated by the success that Keem has had. And I believe that his mom is now deceased. And then third cousin he talks about is Demetrius. who he mentions quite a bit in the song Auntie Diaries. And Demetrius transitioned into a woman. And, a lot of people have very, misguided notions about people who are gay or trans, and they believe they have a bigger propensity to be, sexual abusers, which is just an insane thought, but it is a prevailing thought. So it crossed my mind that the cousin that Kendrick was talking about, that people, were questioning him about, might have been Demetrius. I don't know. But in any case, he says that his mom questioned him about it quite a bit. And that, a spirit guide questioned him about it too. And although he's steadfast in saying nothing ever happened, because he was asked so much about it, he started to internalize it and question his own manhood, which led to, infidelity, proving his manhood through promiscuity and things like that.
And just general lust. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it comes out in the same song that his mom was actually sexually abused as a child. And that's part of the reason why she's so insistent about it. So it all comes back to these words from Eckhart Tolle, about developing a sense of self that's based on the bad things that happen to you. So yeah.
I think it's the fact that Auntie Diaries and, Mother I Sober, Mother Sober are consecutive songs. I had the same connection when I listened to this album and continue to. I think this is, you called it, I think it really is the climax of Mr. Morale. And, Kendrick has taken hip hop and songs really heavy duty places before. And by no means is this the first song to confront, the concept or the thought of molestation, but it's really, really powerful, especially at a time when, Black Trans Lives Matters is a movement unto itself. And there's a lot of, like you said, just stigma. And there's right now, there's a lot of folks, politicians and legislature that is really connecting LGBTQ rights or non-rights with child abuse. And Kendrick has this gift of hitting the times. I think we saw that, on We're Gonna Be All Right, in a major way of what would come in the days that followed. And I think this is another really powerful song, and he's doing it starting with himself. I mean, the whole Mr. Morale concept is looking within, using the mirror, but he finds a way to look within and reach the zeitgeist of what's happening on news sites right now. You listen to NPR, it's really, really, really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So, we jumped ahead on the interlude. I want to bring it back just for a second to Savior. That's another song that I think is super powerful and in a different way. It has the lines, Kendrick made you think about it, but he is not your savior. What's the jingle back in the day that was like that, where they were, it's like the revolution will not be televised, but it's one of those, like, saying a negative thing in repetition. It has a lot of power to it. Talk to me about that record, and if I'm making any sense about the callback.
Yeah, I remember that. I can't put my finger on it, but I definitely know what you're talking about. Yeah, Savior, I think, is another one of those really important songs. I think it explains Kodak Black. It is Kendrick taking off that crown and saying that, people can't put it on him. And he also does that favor for J. Cole, Future, and LeBron. He's basically saying, we've all created these false gods, these icons, and none of them have asked for that. And we shouldn't be looking at them at that way. And Kendrick says on the song, like it when they pro-Black, but I'm more Kodak Black. And that to me is the crux of why Kodak Black is on this album so much. Like, Kodak Black is the opposite of Kendrick in most people's minds. This guy has been in the news about, rubbing on his mom's butt and trying to kiss her in public and stuff like that. And, all these things that are very unsavior-like. And Kendrick is saying, listen, I got a lot of Kodak Black in me too. We're the same. So, it makes a lot of sense. And when you start to look at Kodak's appearances throughout the album, you see that message being reinforced. But Savior, I think, is really, really important. He's saying to your friend, yeah, I know this crown looks ridiculous. I don't want it on my head either, So I think it's a really, really powerful song. And for me, sonically, this is the one that is the most accessible immediately. I do think this is a playlist song. This is a song that you could put on the radio and it would go hard. But yeah, I really love this song.
You've got it on our playlist right now, and I like it. And I always think throughout Kendrick's career, there's folks like YG Hootie or Gunplay, or Kendrick has cast lights of support for folks at times that don't fit the hey, we're alikes, like that don't have the same messages. And he's done that, and I like the fact that it's Kodak Black. I mean, it sort of harkens back to J. Cole and 21 Savage of just showing, because I don't think Kodak Black disappoints on this album, but he is not somebody who's part of my weekly music diet. But you're right. And I also think it's worth noting, when Kendrick talks about, kind of hashtag protesting and just this idea of armchair social activism, he alludes on this song to, perhaps some views on COVID and the vaccine that might not jive so well with some of his supporters. And I think that's interesting because, I look on my social timelines and some of my hip hop heroes have very different opinions than I do about it. And they're speaking about it. And again, I love the fact that Kendrick, whether you agree with him or don't, shows that you cannot put him into a box. Just because he's this or said that doesn't mean he's all these other things. He's his own person, which is really what these 9 songs are very much about.
I think what he says about COVID is brilliant because he takes on both sides of the argument with equal fervor. You know what I mean? He talks about, how some people believe that it's the mark of the devil, and but then, when they're in the hospital bed, they're like, wanting that Pfizer. But then he also says, like, when he caught COVID, which is a revelation there, he started looking at Kyrie, like wondering, like, should he continue to be organic, which suggests that maybe he's not vaccinated too. And then he punctuated with the question, do you really want to know? Like, I think he just captures all aspects of the debate, and it's I think it's pretty funny. But as a savior, what do you expect? Someone like, half people probably think he should be vaccinated and wearing it on his sleeve, and half the people think he should probably be fighting against vaccination. So how do you win?
Most definitely. And it's interesting too, because I would contend that no hip hop artist in the last 20 years, certainly of level, but of the mainstream, even like Kendrick has this beautiful gift of being spiritual and secular at the same time. That's really the balance that's in his music. And, there's a lot of people out there that are like, the blood of Jesus is going to protect me. And he kind of alludes to that in this song. But I say that to get to Auntie Diaries, or Auntie Diaries, depending on where you grew up. And I think what's so interesting about that song, I mean, you already really, really broke it down well, but Kendrick comes to this thesis of choosing humanity over religion, and I love that because I'm sure there is a community out there that, listens to Lecrae and Kendrick and really keeps it to spiritually minded MCs and artists. But Kendrick takes a frontline issue that intersects with society, gender, LGBTQ rights, and religion. And he says, I choose humanity. And I love that line. I mean, that's, again, one of the things that fits into so much discourse of these times.
Yeah, I think that's another really crucial. There are just so many revelations here, and everyone's fixated on the infidelity and the children. And those are all, like, definitely noteworthy events. But for Kendrick Lamar, a guy who has infused so much of his work with religion. I mean, so much, from Cushion Corinthians and the Bible on the cover of Section 80 to Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, and having Maya Angelou lead them in prayer. Like, there's so much, and Damn is all God, and like there's so much religion in his work. For him to say that he is like, kind of renouncing religion a little bit in favor of humanity, I guess more spirituality, is gigantic. That is, I think, really powerful. The other thing about this song was that he tied it back to something that happened to him. There's this video that went viral a few years ago of him in concert, and he invites a fan on stage.
I think it was in Alabama. Yeah.
Alabama, yeah, a white woman. to go to do a song with him. I forget the song, but it used the N-word in it.
It
And
was it was Mad City, but
it's Mad
continue.
City. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought yeah. And she is going in and she doesn't censor herself. And she says it once, and you start hearing people going, "Oh," and Kendrick shoots her a look, and then she does it again, and he shuts it down. I was like, "Yo, wait a minute! You can't say that." And then to tie it to this song, which is so much in support of his trans relatives and gay rights and things like that, to he admits that he's used the F word but never meant any harm by it, and it's just sounds. And for the person to come back and say, yeah, but it wasn't a sound when that person was using the N word with you publicly on stage, like let's keep it consistent, was just really powerful.
Yeah, I thought of that, and one of you over the years have always asked me, you are one of my greatest friends, and you're always like, all right, man, you ever said the N word?
Yeah,
And I always say to you, I never
yeah,
have, but I'm not Mr. Morale because I've said that F word, and I have very dear friends that are in the LGBTQ community, and I've admitted to that, and I love the fact that Kendrick's having a conversation like that on this album.
yeah.
And I said something in error a moment ago. Those two songs are not consecutive. Mother Sober does not come directly after, but they're in sequence, and that was my intent with that.
Yeah.
But talk to me about the title track, because I think especially in breaking down what these two albums mean, that's really poignant.
So Mr. Morale, and this is the really interesting thing about Kendrick, so this is Mr. Morale, the title song of the collection that I believe to be more about his individual journey. And ironically, this is the one where he talks about his family the most out of his immediate family. I'm gonna make a distinction on Mr. Morale. He talks a lot about the family that he was raised with, cousins, moms, things like that. The Big Steppers is more about his current immediate family, Whitney and his children. Mr. Morale is the exception to that. In this body of work, it's Kendrick kind of talking directly to his two kids. He speaks to his son, who's named Enoch, in the first verse. Kendrick is a Gemini. He's got a birthday coming up, I would guess, very soon. And he explains the two sides of himself to his son. He talks about how he's transformed and detoxed from his past self, and yet he's still off. He's fighting external demons, but admits that those same demons he's fighting off are also his internal demons. He talks about being creative, but also being fearful of the expressions that might manifest from that creativity. He talks about past lives and past wives, and this is something that is a recurring theme. And it's really, I think, interesting to note that Enoch was the son of Cain in the Bible, and obviously Cain killed his brother, the first murder, and he was condemned by God to a life of wandering. So if Enoch is the son, does that mean that Kendrick is Cain and he views himself as this? That was, I thought, interesting. And then verse 2, he starts talking to his other child, and we're assuming this is his daughter, and no one has ever heard her name. But in this, he refers to the child as Uzi. And so, given how revelatory Kendrick has been with this, showing pictures of his kids, like infidelity, the whole nine, I have no reason to believe that this isn't the name of his daughter. So I don't, have you seen that? Have you seen that talked about in the press? But
No, I've been very careful to watch, but that's not the places I've looked or trusted. I haven't seen that. And let's also, Uzi is a loaded name, another pun, but it could be a nickname as well. Like there's names, especially when you're thinking Enoch, that Uzi can be short for it too. I think you're onto something with that.
Well, so the interesting thing about it is that, Uzi, like you said, is a gun, but those Uzis are from Israel. And we know that Israel is a holy place, a place of holy significance. So it might mean that he thinks of his daughter as a holy weapon. I think that interpretation is supported a little bit in the verse where he says, sharpening multiple swords in the faith, I believe, and clearly he's got guns on the covers of his album. So he believes in using them to protect his family. He's not against them. So I don't know, man. I think it's interesting, and his message to her is one of contradictions too. He talks about R. Kelly and Oprah, both of whom have been very public about being sexually abused as children, but clearly the pain that they suffered manifested in very different ways. He talks about contrasts like at the repast, which is the meal after a funeral, people eating Popeye's chicken, which is obviously one of the most deadly foods that you can eat. He talks about past lives with Uzi also. And that he's had past life regression therapy. Another, like, I think, interesting revelation. So it's wild, man. This is a really, really, really loaded song in terms of meaning.
What is past life regression therapy?
So a lot of people believe that they've had many lives in the past. And so they go to therapists, and it's almost like hypnosis, where they will be induced into a state where they can start to go back and remember who they were in past lives. And apparently it allows you to tap into past traumas, past things that you've experienced, which will help you to better understand what you're facing in today's world. So, I don't know if Eckhart Tolle does this or not, but Kendrick is mentioning these past lives and this kind of regression therapy enough to suggest that he's been serious about it. He also talks about Keem on this one, and this is where he starts to get into like Keem falling into the trappings that a young person might fall into when they first get this money. So yeah, it's just a deep song.
Absolutely. And it's sandwiched between two other deep ones. You and I spoke a bit about Mother Sober, but you had made a connection at the top of this podcast that I think deserves, the line "in the land where hurt people." That's a connection to the Hard Five. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it comes up here.
Yeah, so in the end of Mr. Morale, Eckhart Tolle speaks again and says people get taken over by this pain body because this energy field that almost has a life of its own. It needs to periodically feed on more unhappiness. And so on Mother Sober, he talks about, he again referencing that he needs to be a savior. He's standing on this notion of two words: heal everybody. And he talks about the notion of past generations following us. But then he raps about this incident where he heard someone in the family assaulting his mother when he was 5 years old, and the helplessness and shame that he had about his inability to help her. It sounds like he was in another room and he just was too scared to go out and even do anything. But at 5 years old, what could he have done?
Yeah.
But that to me reminded me, I just finished Will Smith's book, which I think really does an incredible job of explaining who he is. I think it gives a way more context into how the Chris Rock slap could have happened. But Will talks about in the first couple of chapters, his father being abusive to his mother and him having to witness that a number of times and him being too afraid to interject. He believes that his siblings who were younger than him had more courage in this regard. And it's left a lasting pain, a lasting trauma on him that's manifested many times in him, like, sometimes overreacting in order to protect those who he loves who are being attacked. And so it just reminded me, it sounded very similar to what Kendrick is describing here. And as we know in the Heart Part 5, Kendrick morphs into Will's face in that line where he says, "We're hurt people." And so it all kind of comes back around to me. It's a full circle moment.
Yeah, I mean, and this song deals with some of those things that you were referencing about sex and lust. And the Big Steppers album deals with the family that Kendrick and Whitney have created a lot more. But there's a line, "Whitney's gone by the time you hear this song," which I thought was really interesting. And we don't know at this juncture if the couple could be split. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I thought that, first of all, it's a super vulnerable song. It also leads me to wonder if this one was written first, if this one, just there's a lot there that I think just deserves mention.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that at the end of the song, Kendrick starts to talk about how pervasive sexual abuse is in the Black community in general, and how it's created generations of people who have passed down, who suffered at the hands of abuse, who have internalized it and started abusing each other and passed it down. And, in the end, Whitney comes on and congratulates him on breaking a generational curse. And, this is where my boy Brendan like really hit me with it. What a day to break a curse, like on Friday the 13th. Again, everything that Kendrick is doing is intentional. I had known that I paid note to the fact that it was Friday the 13th, but I couldn't connect those dots, and he helped me connect that. I think he was dead on with it. So Kendrick now, and insisting that he was not abused, has kind of broken this curse, and he's not going to pass it down. And as we heard on Duckworth, this is a trend that started on that song with Top and his dad making the decision not to have a relationship that ended in violence. They reversed what Kendrick said was, he said, pay attention, that one decision changed both of their lives, one curse at a time. So the reversing of the curses started in the past generation, and Kendrick has now completed that mission. So I think it's just a really dope song.
Absolutely. And it also creates space for other folks to come forward, whether they've been through that or not. I mean, you have one of the greatest artists, ever doing that. That's going to have real impactful change. It's no different than J. Cole condemning drugs, and KOD at a time when they've been glamorized so many other places. It's just, it's real. And you said a lot about Mir, up front, but, as we close out this half of the album, of the double album, anything you want to add about Mir?
Yeah, this is where Kodak Black reappears again. And he's the one who opens the song. And he says, I choose me. But now that we have the context from Kendrick that he is Kodak Black, and they're the same, it's basically Kendrick, and we find this out in the end, saying that he chooses himself as well. But yeah, I think we talked enough about it. But this concept of mirror is prevalent in the album. He mentions mirrors on the Big Steppers too. We'll talk about that a little bit. Mentioned several times on Mr. Morale. There's support, I believe, for thinking that he's looking in the mirror. And as I step back and reflect, pun intended, I think that these albums are meant to mirror each other in some way too. There's still like connections I'm trying to figure out. I'm sure that more people are going to build on this, but I think that there's some mirror action going on with these two bodies of 9 songs. There's definitely instances where it feels like there's reflections of one on the other, like Mr. Morale is reflecting Big Steppers. And I think Big Steppers is kind of reflecting Mr. Morale. But yeah, I think the concept of mirror is a big part of this album.
Absolutely. Now let's get into the qualities of Big Steppers, assuming that's the first album that really make it unique. And to your point, the artwork that Kendrick has posted at this juncture, you see that as the Big Steppers artwork. The album we just finished talking about, Mr. Morale, is the one that's on the photographer's page that we have linked to in the article.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think when you listen to it in the order we're doing, that we're breaking it down, when you go back to United in Grief, what he's saying on it makes much more sense. It almost serves as like a summary of everything we've learned from Mr. Morale. Listeners are told that their fulfillment is their own responsibility. Kendrick isn't their savior. We now know this already. He says, I hope you find some peace of mind in this lifetime. I hope you find some paradise. So it's on you to find it, not for him to tell you where it is. Whitney tells him to tell the truth, and he responds he's been going through something for those 1,855 days. And then he lays it out, talking about his infidelity, family jealousy, repeatedly being asked if he's been, molested, his materialism, getting therapy, all that. All those concepts are alluded to on United in Grief, and they just make much, much more sense if you've listened to that second album, Mr. Morale, first. But I will say it works as a summary of what we've heard or as a primer for what's to come, depending on how you want to listen to the album.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to me too, of like having this therapeutic process, which Eckhart is very much a part of in the Mr. Morale album, to then be in a place where you're comfortable speaking your truth. And, that he closes out the album in the final minutes, alluding to potentially not being with his partner anymore. And then you have her reassuring, like, tell your truth, like, give it to me straight, not late. I think that's very significant.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, from there we move into N95, which, worth noting, so far it is the only song of these two albums that we have a visual to. Obviously, the Hard Five, but just 24 hours ago we got the N95 video. This is a very dense, heavy duty song from the album.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one, talking about reflections of songs, is a reflection of the song Savior. On Savior, it's one of the one songs on Mr. Morale where Kendrick is not taking his lens and his gaze and putting it on himself. Instead, he's commentating on what's going on in society. And N95 is doing the same thing. So it plays almost like it would fit on Mr. Morale. He starts taking an aim at social media posers, at false prophets, at capitalism, how exploitative the music industry is, the intrusions of fame, cancel culture. And like you said, the video drop, and you see a lot of that visual imagery portrayed in the video. It starts off with him in all white, hovering above the ocean like a savior. There's a scene where you see him basically filming what would be a music video within a music video, and it's the formulaic, scantily clad woman dancing around the dude. Like, there's just you see him being chased by a gang of people in the hood, and that goes back to him saying in the Heart Part 5 that the hood might not want him anymore, and so he's being chased out of the hood. There's just a lot of imagery in that video that aligns with the song. And I think this one is and it's also the first place where he makes a reference to the Big Stepper.
Yeah, and I think you're really onto something. I think that mirror point is a very valid one, and 100% Savior. That's what you said, right? Savior, not crown. Savior is the song that this is linked to on the other album, and I can see that very well. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking right now. No, they're not in the same place. I had to check.
I checked. Yeah, he's not gonna make it that easy for
you. No, not for me. So oddly enough, you said he refers to himself as the Big Stepper, and then next up you have Worldwide Steppers, which again, I mean, great place to point out your theory surrounding the titles of each album being out of order from the way it's laid out in title. Talk to me about that one. What jumped out to you about this song?
Yeah, so this is the one where he kind of introduces the cast of the characters that make up the Big Steppers, because we still don't know who they are. Like we said in the Super Bowl video, they could have been the troupe that was dancing with them. But here, it starts off with Kodak Black announcing Kodak Black, Oklama to be the Big Steppers. And we know that both of those monikers, Oklama and Kodak Black, Kendrick has used to refer to as himself. So Kendrick is one of the Big Steppers. And then Eckhart Tolle, he mentions as well. So we know that, he's a big prominent part of this. But then Kendrick fills in the rest of the roster. In verse 1, he references, his daughter, Enoch, and Whitney. And so I think that we have the cast of characters of the Big Steppers from this song. So Kendrick, Whitney, Enoch, Uzi, potentially his daughter, Eckhart Tolle, and Kodak Black, who's a foil of Kendrick.
And already,
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, already beckoned to give his truth. This is another place you talk about mirrors where he alludes to infidelity, if not physical, then at least mental, of having lust, of being, in conflict with his partner, which is interesting because that theme of that song develops here, and then it really develops it like a photograph. You start to see it, but by the time you get to Die Hard, the next song, boom, then it's really out there. And Kendrick has that unique way of not every idea is isolated to a single song. You have the mirror concept of them existing two different places in most cases, but that it's a fully formed thread throughout the album, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is where he starts to introduce kind of the conflict, the tension with all the characters of the Big Stepper. So with the kids, it's about wanting to protect them. He's got the guns, We'll hear about them going to school, but he talks about them making higher valleys when they get older. And as we know from the Silent Hill, and Silent Valleys, these are like natural moats that Kendrick uses to protect himself and his family against the intrusions of the public. So he's basically training them to be able to protect themselves. And that's his conflict with them. With Whitney, it's been the infidelities, and he addresses it in detail in this song, talking about how one of his trysts was with a white woman during the Good Kid, Mad City tour. He's pretty cavalier in how he talks about this, because when Whitney asks him about it, he says that it made him think that he was a racist, because he's wondering like if God is okay with this, but seemingly disregarding how Whitney might have felt about it. So that's setting up what is a conflict that we're going to see manifest in a pretty big way later on.
Yeah, he uses the lyrics too of risking it for a stranger, which kind of, that to me, and that manner of wording brings me back to 444 and Jay-Z. And Kendrick's much more on the nose about it, but talks about the value, how much this family means, the children mean, and you're willing to risk it. And it's just powerful stuff. And it's interesting, like you said, the way that race plays into infidelity too, because Kendrick says that particular experience on tour was the second time. The first was when he was a teenager in the Palisades. And even the way he describes that, it just deals with the heaviness of what that means, where that comes from. Like you said, he questions, does that make him a racist? Just heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, and this is also where we start to get some context around why Kendrick might have been gone for 5 years. He drops that he had writer's block for 2 years, which is understandable given like the savior complex and the pressure that's been put on him. But then also he's had 2 children, and so by my count, that's like 2 more years off the table. So when you take all that into context, 5 years really isn't a long time. It's basically a year off, and the rest was dealing with life. And he talks about that later on too.
So we mentioned the stigma, just about molestation, and also probably dealing with LGBTQ family members and just all of that. There's another stigma that's dealt with on this collection, on the Big Steppers, and it comes in on Father Time, of just this notion of therapy, and what Kendrick says of real ends don't need therapy. And that notion is not exclusive to the Black community. There's a lot of folks, there's generations that just didn't believe in it. And this is a very therapeutic album, but the song, down to its title, stays in the space of family and what's at home now. Not Kendrick's father, but what he's responsible for. Talk about this record a little bit, and how you see it.
Yeah, I think this one is a direct continuation of Die Hard thematically, and Die Hard is kind of like a love letter to Whitney. He's kind of confessing his bad behavior and seeking affirmation from her, and also kind of pleading for forgiveness. And on Father Time, Whitney says to him at the start of the song, you really need some therapy. So it seems like that's kind of her response to his pleas in the other song. And Kendrick is, like a lot of guys, like Resistant, he says real brothers don't need therapy. But then he launches into this, super intense verse about his daddy issues that he's had.
It does get into his father, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that what this is this is actually a session that he's having with his therapist, Eckhart Tolle, where he just gets into, most people who've done therapy realize it always leads back to your parents. It's usually, mother issues, and, for girls, it's often daddy issues. But Kendrick just talks about all the issues he's had with his father, being toughened up on the basketball court, never being able to call foul, even if he's bleeding, not being allowed to be tired, not feeling pain, being taught that it's not even okay to properly mourn the loss of a parent if it means interfering with your job. You can't trust anybody, and a lot of other lessons that seem to kind of harden his heart. And it also seems he learned from his dad that once someone crosses you, they're done. You don't kind of forgive them. And this is where he says a line about not understanding when Kanye got back with Drake. And then if you take that and go back to his rap on Family Ties, he talks about himself being as an old school Gemini, unlike Kanye. And so now we know that, okay, that's what he was talking about. That's what, he thinks that Kanye was, kind of soft, I guess, for going back to Drake or fickle. So there's a lot to unpack in this song, but I think this is Kendrick's public therapy session, and it's all tied back to daddy issues.
Yeah, it's one of the only places in the album where he really references rap peers. And a lot of headlines. That was the immediate thing that I saw after the album dropped. And to me, it's interesting, but there's not, I think it's one of the lesser interesting parts of the song of just making that comparison.
Yeah.
And it also made me wonder too. I mean, we did a whole podcast based on another observation you had regarding Drake and Kanye's kind of Armistice concert. And, if you are raised a certain way or with a militant mind, a heart and mind, Kanye could have seen that he was dissed during that concert. I might be making too much of it, but I think it's all relevant. And Kendrick is more astute than most.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's two interludes. I mean, we spoke of the last, but this one has the Rich interlude. And it's funny, Kendrick uses part of that cast that you spoke of a minute ago to kind of tee the song up. Speak about it, because this time it's Keem.
Yeah, so again, Keem seems to be a representative of a younger version of Kendrick. They have the same DNA, the same family ties. And, Kendrick has mentioned a lot of times that he's observing Keem and some of the things he sees that might be kind of disturbing behavior. But he's also talked about, he's mimicked Keem himself. Like when Keem bought some cars, I think he bought a car too. Like there's some things he's doing where he kind of regresses as well. But this is with Kodak Black, actually. And so Keem was the one who was on the Savior interlude, and Kodak Black is the one who's on the Rich interlude. And, this is Kodak's kind of response to what Kendrick said about Kendrick being Kodak Black. Kodak at one point takes on the voice of his doubters, who ask him, what you doing with Kendrick? What you doing with a legend? Which is insulting, right? But as we know, Kendrick doesn't see himself above Kodak Black. So why should other people? They are the same, And so Kodak kind of punctuates that at the end, where he says, now look at this, we own property, So he's making moves too. So, I think it's just a setup for the next song that Rich is about the spirit.
Yeah, and you had said, that you see the campaign of this album, and I agreed, really starting in August of 2021 with Family Ties. And, artistically, Rich Spirit is a fulfillment of that, down to the way that Kendrick raps and bringing that, I'll call it a cadence. I mean, it follows the actual rhymes, but adding the Hulk Hogan brother, thing to it, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Father Time is another one of those songs that I think is a reflection that could have fit on Mr. Morale, because it's Kendrick looking very inwardly. On Rich Spirit, this is Kendrick being very open and transparent about his new family. He talks about taking his baby to school, and then I pray for her. Again, like that's the conflict here. He's trying to protect his family, make sure they're good. And he talks about he knows what can happen when you're at school, and so he's concerned about that. And at the end of the verse, he says, "Little Man is the big man's." Man was his nickname. We heard that on Humble, but now he's the big man taking his daughter to school. So it's really about the kind of reclusive lifestyle that he has, and that he is a rich dude with a broke phone. So he's really trying to maintain that balance, have the benefits of fame and making the money longer and the family stronger without the negativities of it, so keeping the public away, keeping the world away. Yeah, phone, man, you get rid of your phone, you're kind of getting rid of the world. And so
yeah.
And like you said, he uses that repetition of brother at the end of the lines, which is very similar to what he did at Family Ties. If you go back and look at that verse, when he's using that brother cadence is when he's talking about his life being an amazing place, and this song kind of reinforces that. He's got a rich spirit. He also refers to himself as a rich brother on that song too, so I think Rich Spirit is just, him saying, that he's in that place that he was at the end of Family Ties. And at the very end of Family Ties, it says, show my ass and take you out of class. So it kind of comes full circle with what he's doing with his daughter.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's interesting, like, wealth, and we talk about it a lot, and this album has that reference of, I hope you find peace mentally. Like real wealth is peace of mind and the ability to take distance. And United in Grief, talks about some of those material things that Kendrick purchased. And he even acts, it reminds me of like Jay-Z when, he put out Success. Like, I got this that I ain't seen in months. I got this, I got that, but what? And Rich Spirit is like, I have this distance and ability and peace of mind and space not to be burdened by a phone. I remember for years, Rick Rubin and Kanye West did not have phones that you could reach them on to speak. They would text, they would chirp, they would email, but you're not overwhelmed with the asking of people. And that's one of the things that Kendrick has belabored on the other album here of just phone calls and responsibilities and people that are ungrateful based on the latest thing you've done for them. So it's really, really heavy stuff. And it goes into what I would call, of the 18 songs, the most raw. Alchemist produced We Cry Together. Heavy duty stuff. I struggle with this song, I'll level with you. But talk to me about why this happens, why this argument plays out the way it does, and where it lands on this album.
It's interesting. This is my middle son, my 18-year-old son's favorite record on the album, which I thought wow. My youngest son, his is Father Time. And I was like, yo, is there anything we need to talk about? He's like, nah, we're good. So
damn.
This is another reason why I think the albums are supposed to be played in the order in which we've reviewed them. So We Cry Together, so like Mother Supper was the climax, I believe, on Mr. Morale, with Mirror being the coda. I think for We Cry Together, it's the climax not only of the Big Steppers, but of the entire body of work. Because now we've had two albums filled with allusions to infidelity, passive aggressive remarks between the both of them. You need therapy. God, I felt like I was a racist, like all these things. And so it makes sense that, all these things that have come between them would lead to an explosion, would be a combustible explosion. And that is exactly what We Cry Together is. It is like just absolute emotional violence in my estimation. Like Kendrick is playing himself, and he has his love interest, which throughout this entire album we've known to be Whitney. It's played by a woman named Taylor Page, but at the very beginning of the record, Whitney herself says this is what the world sounds like. So we can either take that literally, and she's telling us this is what their world behind closed doors sounds like when it gets to that point. It could be a metaphor for, how men and women are interacting with one another. It could be a clash of like just the polarization of the world. It could be all three, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that she's saying that on a song that is an all-out slugfest, verbal slugfest between a man and a woman, and they're talking about a lot of the things that we know to line up with what Kendrick has said has gone on in their lives, with the infidelity and the insecurity and all these things. It makes me think that this is like, a recreation of some of the harsher times in their lives, and the song is brutal, like you said, uncomfortable and super raw. And they fight like cats and dogs, but by the end, they exhaust themselves and they seem to come back together and have make up sex most likely, and it's okay. And at the end, Whitney once again says, stop tap dancing around the conversation, which suggests to me that, listen, sometimes we got to fight. Sometimes we got to get it out there, and it's going to be raw and ugly, but it's not going to ever get better until you address it.
deal with it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting song, and that, as a couple, they've been together for damn near 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. And this song I think is a bit of a time capsule because there's references to being broke, there's references to Kendrick's mom giving a car, like a Honda, I think, and obviously that doesn't fit within the narrative of where they are now. But to your point, through therapy, through good communication, you got to deal with those cracks in the foundation. So it makes sense. And it's funny, the rawness and the vulnerability and just the cringe effect of arguments like that, which to the point of this is what happens. We've all been there, I imagine. There's one MC in the canon of hip hop that I feel has done that before. And it's probably the biggest surprising guest who's on the next and final song of the Big Steppers, which is, Tony Stark's Iron Man Ghostface Killer. Would you ever in a million years have imagined if the one, I know Kodak Black is a noteworthy guest and Keem, but from hip hop, would you have ever expected GFK to be a guest on a Kendrick Lamar album in 2022?
Maybe. Yeah, he's been a guest on a Kanye album, New God Flow, and he's iconic to people. And again, Kendrick is super intentional with guests, having Kodak Black on here and Rihanna on Damn and Rhapsody on To Pimp a Butterfly.
MC8 on,
Yeah, this to me makes 100% sense when you think about the title. And love is not like just pure red, man. It's ambiguous. There's a lot of sadness and happiness. So Purple Hearts, obviously, Ghost was the co-star on the Purple Tape. So you got that, and you already said it. In that Ghostface, I think better than almost any other rapper out there, has just a body of work of complicated love raps that is like unparalleled. So who better than him to accompany Kendrick on a song that I believe is kind of meant to resolve all that we've heard about the infidelities and the explosiveness of We Cry Together. And Kendrick seems to have learned his lesson on this song. He talks about, this is my undisputed truth. So he's now telling the truth that Whitney asked him to tell. He seems to have learned his lesson. He says that he'd rather deny himself of other women rather than jeopardizing his relationship. I'd rather fast than F it up, effing up with skirts because I'm rational. And, he talks about wanting to avoid potential traps like hanging out with other rappers and being on social media and going to parties. And he also says that other women are now sorry that they're dead to him, basically. So, he's clearly gotten to where he needs to be if he's really going to be about Whitney and the family, so this song to me is resolution like that. And, he says that he conveys that he's blessed because Whitney has an open heart and forgives and can heal. So it now starts to seem like we have an answer to that question that was posed on the song of Mr. Morale as to whether or not she's gone. It sounds like they've kind of moved past that. And then, in the end, Kendrick turns to us and tells us that, he hopes that we can learn from those lessons and wishes us a patient life and says that's kind of the key to it. So, and then at the very end, as we know, he says that if God be the source, and I'm the plug talking. So he's now brought that message and completed the message, and, end of story. To me, this is like the perfect ending.
Yeah, and shout out to Summer Walker too. I think she added a lot of sauce to that record. Yeah, it's amazing. I think the way that you've interpreted this and what you're proposing makes me appreciate the album more. I hope others that tune into What's the Headline get to agree, man. It makes a lot of sense, and it's still art. There's still layers of the onion that can be peeled with every listen. And I'll be really curious if Kendrick, a lot of people said, his first stop is usually Big Boy in LA. I wonder if Kendrick will ever break down this album. He confirmed as much on Damn later, but it took some time. This one I'll be curious about, just given how personal it is and how heavy it is.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. Even if he waits 2 or 3 years, people are going to ask him, "Is it true? Were you unfaithful, like all these things that he's put this out into the world. But I think he's done it in a way where he's prevented it. He's actually like shortcut it. He's put out the word himself, and so there's really nothing left to talk about. Like so, but yeah, I think it was incredible.
Yeah. And I honestly think, I mean, tell me if you feel differently. This isn't even the kind of like you and I often, when albums come out and they're worthy of a deep dive, which I think this is the new record for one single album from our platform of this podcast. This isn't the type of thing where I'm like, I don't even know that I would be capable of putting a number on it right now or ranking it within Kendrick's catalog. Have you started those internal questions?
I haven't. I will say that on first listen, sonically, it wasn't grabbing me. There were a couple songs that did. It started to grab me as a concept, and lyrically about 2 or 3 listens in. But I gotta say that now on day 2 or 3, I love it. I love it musically. Like Mother Sober is in my top 5 of all Kendrick songs, and I think that it's gonna be a special album sonically too. So yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I really like the way you broke that down. I listened to it 3 times this morning, and I like it more with every listen. And there were things that didn't jump out at me on the first one, the way each of Kendrick's other albums have. They've had that moment where I'm like, I just like this as a standalone good song. This one doesn't have that. I mean, maybe a bit with Crown, but it feels like an adventure. We're living in a time where television is made to be rewatched. A lot of the great TV of things you may have missed, go back and watch points develop. And I think that is what's happening with albums like this. And I think, 3 days in, you have done a phenomenal job. You have done a phenomenal job of, really decoding this album. So,
Thank you, man.
Salutes to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For all who have listened this far, there's an article on the site too, which will have a little bit different perspective, but generally, the same. But I got a question for you before we get to Song of the Week. Do you think, we now know Kendrick's going on tour, I think starting in July. I can't wait for that. Do you think we're going to get new Kendrick Lamar music within the next 2 years?
No. I mean, we're talking solo. I wonder if he will even be willing to collaborate again, just given those comments of like hanging around rappers. But I think this statement has to be such a purge. I'll stick to that. I'll say no. What do you say?
I'm going to say yes. I think that this album is going to take the pressure off Damn. Maybe, who knows? It could win album of the year finally. But I think that he did this. He's gotten that weight off his shoulders, a Pulitzer Prize winning album, I think. And so I think that the things that contributed to his writer's block, he's got 2 kids. I don't know if he's going to go in for a third or not. But more importantly, I think his move to PG Lang, I think it's going to be very important for him to put out music for that imprint. But also, he's just going to have a different level of freedom. I said at the top of this that he's an entrepreneur and moves to the beat of his own drum. But it's different when you have your own company. It's a different level of freedom, and so I think he's gonna have some more output soon.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I love about Kendrick, and there's not another artist. I think Jay is the closest, but Jay doesn't have Kendrick's, batting average. But, once he gets to the finals, he has to win. And I think he treats albums like finals. And there's always, a little precursor, like the Heart series. I will be shocked if Kendrick Lamar in the next 2 years or in the next 5 puts out an album that isn't as thoughtful and cohesive as this. Like, this is the new standard. Just from one artist, one body of work, a full length this, he's never trotted it in, yeah. And yeah, that's a true testament to where the art form is. When a lot of people say albums are dead, a lot of people that are paid a lot of money in these big companies say albums are dead. K-Dot just gave us 2 of them.
Any predictions on the sales?
I'm not good at calling numbers. I think it's a number one with a bullet. And I think that this album will be interesting. It could stay at number one for 1 week. I don't know anything coming down the pike right now that's really going to knock that. But I could see a lot of very novice, not novice, but a lot of the casual fans, that tune in for that hit record being really scared away from this one. I think these albums really test the fandom, not because they're super polarizing, but because it's an investment and there isn't just a breakaway record. And that, just the way the charts work these days, could have implications. But what about you? You know numbers.
I've been in chat rooms where people have been reluctant to listen because they just don't have the mental energy to invest in it yet. Kendrick, I was thinking about this the other day, is like lobster, and the restaurant's not de-shelling it for you, so.
Or crawfish. Yeah, there you go.
It's definitely worth it once you do it, but man, you got to work to get that meat, so.
Pause.
So, but I think there are enough Kendrick stands out there, and there's been anticipation for 5 years. And again, like the feedback I'm getting even from my own kids, who I don't expect to have the same level of understanding as some people would on it yet, makes me think that it's more sonically accessible than we might think. And so I'm going to put it at over 500,000 units. I think it's going to be the biggest of the year by far. And, who knows, maybe as people start to dig in, things like this and other things provide a framework, it'll take on even more
trend. Yeah, and I think this can influence, Kendrick's a leader. This could influence a lot of great hip hop from other artists. I will say, and this isn't a pot shot, but to me, you talk about accessibility, it is far easier for me to play these two albums in any order than it was last year and this year to play Donda, which has refrain songs and reduxes and all of that. There's a lot of momentum to these 18 songs, and it's not 2 hours, it's an hour. We could have played this album twice in this podcast episode. So absolutely, yeah, curious to see how this one plays out. But as you alluded to, song of the week.
For me, it's Mother Sober, man. That song, we didn't even mention Beth Gibbons from Portishead being the vocalist, but just the piano and her vocals, it's just so, and just what Kendrick is dropping on there and the way he says it, just, man, it speaks to me. It speaks to me. How about you?
Incredible record. And it's funny that the track listing, listed as Beth Gibbons of Portishead, Yeah. I'm going with Crown, which, I know may not be a lot of people's favorites. It's just that gets me. And I love the way he liberates himself in that song. And I'm in a season of growth and liberation too. So that one really resonates.
Word. Well, yo, man, it's been a pleasure.
It's been an honor, man. Bravo once again. And, folks, tell us your thoughts, your comments, and we're curious to be on this journey together, man.
Absolutely. For sure. Man. All right, man.
Until we do it again. Peace.